everybody. Welcome back from the break. I am very honored to be your afternoon speaker, right when jet lag is the strongest. So I think you'll get me loopy enough that we'll have a really deep conversation. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today, Annette. It's wonderful to continue to be a part of your life in many different forms. So thank you for this invitation, and to getting to meet all of you and hear what you're up to has been really wonderful so far. So if Hei-Jun's talk didn't make you feel a little uncomfortable, I'm going to take you even further into the land of discomfort. So get ready for it. I will hope that what we can do is stay amused about it, because there are dynamics that I would love to talk about what's happening inside of us, about what's happening in the world of design, that affect our ability to imagine and be creative. And if we ignore those dynamics, we ignore things that are getting in the way of our effectiveness. So we need to be talking about it, and we need to be talking about it in a way that doesn't take us down. So I hope we can kind of toe the line here. We're going to go a little further into some of this creative anxiety discussion and see what we can create from it as a result. Okay, first I want to ask the same question that got asked from you in the last session, but I want you to close your eyes. So just close your eyes for a minute, and I'd like for you to think about, in the last year, how many of you, so I'm going to want you to raise your hand, felt some kind of stress or anxiety or overwhelm, either in your work or in your life? All right, I see hands, just letting you all know. I want you to keep your hand up if that feeling interfered with your ability to create. And just because I asked you to keep your eyes closed, I'm going to reflect back to you. It's quite consistent. Hands mostly stayed up. Some people's hands went down. All right, you can put your hand down. I just wanted you to close your eyes to have a little sense of privacy. This is a conversation between me and you. Everybody didn't have to be in the loop on that. So thank you for your honesty. So we know that stress and anxiety and overwhelm are present in our lives. And in many cases, it is affecting our ability to create. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction about why I'm here. I mentioned this last night, but I spent almost 2 decades at the design and innovation company IDEO, where I went from many different roles, from intern to CEO. So I have a lot of different views of the creative process. For those of you that don't know IDEO, it is a creative powerhouse of an organization. Clients come to IDEO to help solve questions they don't know how to solve, maybe even sometimes identify the questions they don't even know to ask. It's very well known for innovation and coming up with innovative solutions. And in fact, IDEO has been a remarkable organization at codifying creative process and methods and documenting that, writing that. There's tons that's published, there's podcasts, there's courses, there's a lot that comes from IDEO about creative methods. I'm not going to go into that today. If you were hoping to get that from a representative of the IDEO ecosystem, I am not going to bring that up today, because what I wanted to focus on are some of the things that are limiting our ability to do all of that. Some of the rising dynamic that we've seen over the last decade plus, that now we feel firm footing in, that it's getting harder and harder to be creative. And I can tell you some of the context that I have that helps me say that. Oh, did you notice Annette in here? It's so funny. I was like, I want to show a picture of like a project team, and like every one of my pictures has Annette in it. So we worked really closely together. But I wanted to tell you that in my many years at IDEO, I was primarily in our organizational transformation practice, and then built and led our education practice. And both those practices were like the nerds of IDEO. We were like the people working on the hard stuff that other people walked by and were like, ooh, I'm glad I'm not on that project. And that is nodding with this very knowing feeling, because we were working on hard stuff. I'll just dig in a little bit on the education work. We were designing learning tools and technologies, global learning platforms. We're designing schools and school systems. In education, as many of you know, you don't really get to work on like a slice of the question. Like immediately, everything is a systems question. And systems questions have a lot of complexity to them, and they have a lot of people that have a stake in where you head, which means that in your design work, you have to reconcile a lot of people's needs. And that brings an enormous amount of complexity, an enormous amount of empathy is required in order to be able to do that, and an enormous amount of kind of artful facilitation to be able to bring all that together into a solution that reconciles all of that need. These were hard questions. And for many years, like I say, we were the sort of outcasts. We were people were glad we were doing that, but when they worked on one project, they were no, we want to go back to some of the fun stuff that feels a little bit simpler. Just to point out in this image, I hope you guys laughed because you saw Annette in there and I pointed it out, but I don't know if you noticed everybody's faces. If you couldn't see it when I've circled it, I'm gonna just zoom in for you. I don't even know what we were discussing, but what's so funny is a lot of pictures look like this, right? And I think this is the way that the rest of IDEO perceived us. We looked like this all the time. Because everything was hard. And it's not that we weren't being creative, but we were really managing this. So, do you remember this? This is school, actually, this is what, and not to mention this last night, but the whole design of this program was informed by something she worked on at IDEO, which was called School Retool. This is that team. So even more meta for those in the know. But one of the reasons we look like this is the scale of questions that we were working on. And I'll just give you for instance. So for instance, this now is about 10 years ago. There was some research that came out about brain development that showed that adolescence actually lasted much longer than we understood. So typically it was thought that adolescence kind of ends at 18 and the brain is formed. And so anybody who was convicted of a crime after they were 18 was convicted as an adult. But then we found out that actually that adolescence kind of lasted more toward 25, especially in young men. So there became this understanding of this window of time between 18 to 25, where their risk centers of the brain hadn't really fully been formed. And there was a real opportunity to think about how to redesign the way that we were imprisoning people who had committed crimes in that age window, that we had a window of time for evolution that we didn't think we had. So there was a lot of organizations who came together and said, let's make a proposal for how we could evolve the way our prisons are designed, especially for young men 18 to 25. Can you see why our faces sort of looked like that last image? These are heavy questions, and these are questions that need design. They need the creativity and imagination of designers. But this is not an easy question. And we pulled together a team. Tons of people were excited to work on this. And we pulled together a team with a lot of diverse background and experience and skills to be able to look at this question. And for those of you that know, IDEO's strength, perhaps contribution to the design field, was really about codifying a human-centered design process. So every project we work on, as we want to learn about the question that we're there to answer, we start out by talking to people that are going to be receiving the things that we're designing. We want to know their lives. We want to know what's on their minds. We want to know how to best design for and with them. And so our team started by going into prisons and talking to young men to understand their lives and what they need. And they came back to the office wrecked. They had all kinds of questions about themselves, about people's lives, about the system that we're in, about the conditions that might have configured these situations that people are in, about the way that we are either rehabilitating or punishing, about the way the system perceives people, about their own safety, they had so many questions about themselves and their relation to the people that they're designing for. And they really struggled. They struggled to design given the weight of the question they were being asked. Now, I want to tell you, we did navigate through it and navigated through it beautifully. And I find myself these days reflecting back on projects like this and saying, to see what did we do that helped us navigate through this complexity and this stress, because we're all living through that in the kinds of questions we're answering today. As I mentioned, I saw that same kind of anxiety rise no matter what project room you walked into. Over time, even the historically fun projects had complexity to them. That the role design was playing was bigger and bigger, we're working on bigger questions, or even if we're working on the same questions, they were coming with a weight of expectation of understanding how our solutions fit into an existing system. So the complexity and the responsibility of design kept rising. So I saw it no matter where I was. And you know what? This is just going to keep going. Because what are the kinds of things that we're facing today that need new design solutions? It's things like poverty alleviation or climate change, or how we're designing inclusive organizations, inclusive societies, the challenges that rise from migration. We have challenge after challenge after challenge that is asking us to rise to it, asking us to define new ways of living. Plus, every single one of us, including the 20-somethings that you're all working with, can now see systems like we never had to before. We have information and empathy and understanding of the complexity of the world, of different people's needs, about power dynamics, about the way that we're harming each other without even trying. We're aware of systems now. And we've got anxiety-producing machines in our hands to, in between any thought we have, fill our minds with stress, with stressful news about awareness of the world, about the things that are happening that we can't control and can't understand. So the dynamics of today are putting us into anxiety all the time, whether that's generalized, as you mentioned, or specific to our creativity. So all of these dynamics, do you know what that does to our nervous system? Yes, it puts our nervous system into response. And there's a lot of responses our nervous system can have. It's not just the fight or flight. There's a lot now about fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, these new terms for flop being like you just go passive, that like the intensity is just so high, or I'm just so triggered. I'm not prepared to fight. I'm not prepared to run, so I'm just gonna go passive. Or fawn, I'm just gonna kind of be nice. I'm gonna compliment everything in the situation. I'm gonna get myself stable in this environment that I'm in because that's what my nervous system is asking me to do to stay safe. Now, this is real wisdom in the body, right? All of this anxiety, all this fear, all this uncertainty, it is real wisdom that our bodies are responding in this way. But what does that do to our ability to imagine? It makes it practically impossible. So we are in a tough moment because it's exactly all of these dynamics of the expansive moment of need that we have in the world for our imagination that is causing the very shutdown of our imagination. And the future needs our imagination more than ever. I'm going to just pause for a minute because I know that's a lot. I'm going to give you a second to just chat with your neighbor and just, how does this feel? Do you relate to it? Do you see it in your workplaces or in your classrooms? Maybe just chat with your neighbor for a second. All right, I'm going to keep us going. I know there's a lot to talk about here. We're going to have a lot more time for discussion. I want to build us through this. So I want to just gut check with you all. Is this resonating to your own experiences or what you've noticed in students? I'm seeing nodding, seeing a vibe. It feels like it's resonating. Just need a little bit of feedback. Okay, excellent. I want to take a bit of a pause on that line of thinking and talk for a second about imagination. I've used the word a lot. I didn't define it. I had a pre-conversation with Anna who told me that the realm of imagination is so expansive that you can use it however you want to use it, just define how you're using it. So I'm going to take a minute, because Anna's in the room, and define how I'm using imagination. So I kind of see imagination like a river flowing. It's this capability that's in us that just goes. That's what life force is and life force does. It's there and it's always flowing. And we have varying degrees of access to it. It's something we can build up and have clear sunny skies where we really see that river flowing. And maybe like the stormy skies make it really hard to see what's happening in that river, what's flowing in that river. So that's my feeling about imagination, that this is not something we have to do, it's something that we have to access. And we have varying degrees of access to that. Anna has a beautiful paper, which she sent me to help me understand even the range of the way that imagination is defined. And there are so many different ways that people use the term imagination. So there are things like being able to create mental imagery. There are things like being able to imagine ourselves in the past or the future. There are things like being able to create new ideas, engage aesthetically, have an aesthetic response, or even dreaming, meditating, hallucinating, things like that. Great framework for understanding that we can talk about imagination and there's so many different forms of it. Today, I'm particularly interested in these two, these ones where we're about coming up with new ideas, especially for the future in these complex systems that we're living in. And I think it requires a lot of capabilities that we have naturally in us. So that was my sidebar. Thank you, Anna. So my real question is, how can we reclaim our imagination in the face of all of this complexity? How can we get bold and great things accomplished when the forces that we're living through make it stormy skies for our ever-flowing river of imagination? I think in order to do this, we have to become conscious of these dynamics. We have to know what's happening, not just presume we can pretend it'll all be okay, or just keep going because it's always worked a certain way. These dynamics are alive in us on a daily basis, and they're definitely alive in young people today. I read a recent survey. Sorry, I didn't put it on the screen, which means I can't cite it properly, but something like 85% of young people in America have like reported visible signs of anxiety. This is huge, especially post-pandemic. So this is going to be in the generation that are in your classrooms. So I've got a preliminary framework for us today. I don't stand here saying this is accurate. I stand here saying this is a hypothesis or a beginning that perhaps we can all expand on together. But I've got 3 different triggers I wanted to explore that may shut down the imagination. And what are the things that we can do to manage when we're in that state and how we might be able to move through it? So again, fun stuff. I want you to remember the faces in that picture. This is where we are. I think this is fun, so let's call it fun today. That we're going to talk about being overwhelmed by empathy. We're going to talk about just our minds being overloaded with information. And we're going to talk about what ambiguity does to us when the ambiguity is too high. Okay, are we ready? Okay, thank you. First one, empathy overwhelm. If it's not obvious, this is definitely what that team experienced when I mentioned that in the work to redesign the prisons. Their ability to process what they experienced was so clouded by their questions of themselves and themselves in relation to, well, the overall question, that they just felt really stuck. So what was happening inside of them when that happened? First of all, there's stuff happening in the brain. There's capabilities we have to mirror experiences of people around us that kind of went into overload, where the pain and the suffering that they witnessed or heard about in these people's lives became part of their own sense of themselves, and they struggled maybe to separate their own selves from the people that they were speaking with. The best friend of ours these days, the amygdala, which is, the survival state of us, went into freak out and said, hey, we've got to get safe. So maybe let's avoid the problem. There's a lot happening in our natural responses for the emotions that were welling up inside of the team. And primarily you could see, now this is going to be different for everybody, but there was just a general emotional distress that the team got stuck in. And that's just in the brain. Then there's the mind, right? And not sure I can define the real difference, but we know those are different dimensions. There's physiological things that are happening to us, and then there's kind of emotional or mental things that are happening for us. But the team was really connected to the suffering that they now understood, that they maybe hadn't thought about that deeply with a human before. And so people can have different reactions to that. You can go numb from compassion. You can get exhausted by having to process all of that, or maybe get stuck in like the position of your own privilege and the guilt that that might cause. So there was a lot going on for this team. And I think the core question underneath this is really like this, who am I? Who am I to solve this giant problem? So if you find yourself or a team in that state, what can you do? I'm sure all of you are now well practiced in some of the techniques of just calming the nervous system. The first step is just get yourself back, right? So if you are now in some kind of nervous system response, you and your team have to find how to get back to yourselves and a kind of comfortable space where you can engage again. From an empathy overload perspective, tons of stuff you can do. So here, we can breathe, we can ground, we can go for a walk. Let's call those universals. You can talk about it with the team, but maybe bound the time so you're not in an endless loop of that distress. Validate your feelings, validate each other's feelings, and recognize people have different relationships than you do to these questions at hand. Maybe someone's not in emotional distress, but you are, and that's okay. Make that okay in the climate of the team. And of course, you want to take a break to let everything settle in before you come back. So these are just the basics of maybe calming the nervous system enough to re-engage. So then how do we manage it? I mean, that reaction is still going to be there. It's still going to be available to us. And I'll tell you, this team did some remarkable things to manage the emotional distress that was very likely to come anytime they were working in the project space together. The first inclination that people may have is to create distance. And I have a feeling a lot of your students may do this as well if you're doing any human-centered design work, that it's like easy to just presume about people or call people or ask people stuff. It's hard to go out onto the street and spend time with people. So my extreme recommendation here is find how to build relationships as part of that first step of a design process, not just I'm going to go interview someone and extract their life story. Lean in to the questions that you have about people's lives, even if it's disruptive to the way that you think about your own. Some of the things this team did were really honoring of the men that we were working with. One of the things they did was they went back to share the work that had been done. So they had chatted with them about their lives at the beginning. They actually went back and did a workshop with the guys to like get their ideas about what was possible, and then went back to before a proposal got shared with the state. They said, we want to make sure we're representing you properly. Now that's a relationship. That's a co-design relationship, not just an interview dynamic. The second thing they did that I think was quite wise was they set boundaries around the input. Once they found a strategy to the design question, how might we redesign? They concluded, there's nothing we can do to change what landed these guys here. But actually, we can help set them up in the time we have with them to transition into the world in a way that helps them not reoffend. So once that word transitions came up as the strategy, everything else was pushed aside. That's very interesting, but it doesn't help us learn more about transitions. Let's work on transitions. That allowed them to reduce the noise and really focus on what was going to matter. And the last was that they gave voice to the men that they had worked with. And we used our role, the power that we had. Instead of feeling guilty about that positionality, we used it. We brought the voices of these young men into the room with the client organizations and helped them understand where the insights were coming from, where the ideas were coming from. So you can see how this is still a human-centered design process, but it's very different in some of the expectations we set up with the team about how they might work and how they might see their role. Any thoughts or comments before I move to the next one? I just want to see how that lands. Any thoughts or comments on this? Does this feel far? Yeah.
Maybe with the boundaries also see that there are lots of other actors
Yes.
trying to contribute to the same problem.
Yes.
So that also...
Beautiful. Yeah. Recognizing that you're not alone here, you're not the hero. I think that's part of why, especially I think people early in their career go into some of these panic modes, is because they feel like responsible for carrying everything. This team went from, we're redesigning the prison system, to nope, we are designing for more successful transitions. We right-sized the problem to something that we could help do something about. All right. Anybody triggered? Remember, it's fun. It's fun to feel that way. Okay. All right. I'm going to go through the second one. I'm going to go through these a little more quickly. Cognitive overload. Anybody feel that on a daily basis these days? Yep. You want to breathe? Let's do that first step together. There's breathe. Right, because the deeper you dive into anything these days, the more complex we recognize that it is. And of course, that becomes an endless cycle of learning, and we feel just overloaded with all that we could know or should know, etc. So, what's happening in the brain and the mind? I think that maybe this feels a little bit more familiar than some of the emotional triggers. But too much information is just flooding the brain. It's making it hard to feel like you can make decisions. Your working memory breaks down. It's hard to take more in. And then the parts of you that are like responsible for higher level thinking or planning, they just go into overdrive, and that becomes super exhausting. And that can also trigger that nervous system response, any of those 5 Fs that we love so much. And of course, in our minds, we're stuck in this kind of endless analysis, the feeling that we don't know enough. And that pushes us to keep going and then get really fatigued and maybe even burnt out by trying to keep learning. And the real thing that puts us into pain is that I just can't process all of this. Like, this is just too much. This feels like too much for me. So again, we've got basic strategies for how to move through it. Breathing, one of the best. And then here, this little, it starts to be about how we can organize what we already know. These are ways that we can calm our nervous system, saying, I actually do know a lot right now. So organizing your thoughts or your input, sorting stuff, clustering stuff, prioritizing it, taking time away from the problem, allowing it to seep in rather than staring at the wall or staring at the research. All of these things are going to be helpful to help you reset your nervous system. But then the question becomes, we don't want to just keep putting ourselves into that. So as a designer, what can you do? Well, here, this is less about that first phase of design where we're out in the world learning about people, and more in that phase of design where we're trying to synthesize. We're putting together all the things that we learned. So there's some nice techniques you can do here as a designer that help narrow some of the endless loop of learning. First one is about experts. We can rely on experts, it turns out. I think this is a thing especially young people coming out of schools don't really realize. They think they have to come up with all the answers on their own, but a lot of experts have done the research and figured this out for us. And so we can partner with them in our design work to really kind of marry the insights we've gained from the human-centered perspective and bring their researched expertise into creating. If you feel overwhelmed by the system, making a map really helps. Mapping the relationships or mapping the players is a great technique. There's lots of ways to do it, but I hope that you can help your students learn how to process in that way, visualize the complexity. And then the last is a trick that I learned in one of my first projects at IDEO, where I was overwhelmed by how much I had learned. And my boss at the time said to me, okay, the presentation is tomorrow. What are the top 10 things you want to share? And I listed a bunch of stuff, and he said, there's your answers. And I realized, sometimes we sort of overthink that synthesis because our mind is swimming in all that information. Sometimes you can just ask yourself a question that puts you in your intuition and recognize that you have synthesis that you can share. So that trick is don't look at the research, just see what's inside of you. All right, I'm going to move us through the third one, because I want us to have time to discuss this. Ambiguity paralysis. How does that sound? Sounds like a gift. Any of you feel this before? Where you're just like, oh my God, there's just so much ambiguity. I don't really know how to move forward. So this is when there's just no clear answer and we don't know what will work and we just feel stuck. We just feel stuck. That core feeling, I just don't know what will work. I'll tell you, I was a CEO 4 months in. We had to shut down all of our offices because of a global pandemic. I had no idea what was going to work. None of us did. We have been in ambiguity paralysis a lot in the last many years, that we have had many situations where we just hadn't seen anything before that gave us a basis of understanding. We had to take leaps. We had to take guesses about what to do. So what's happening when you feel paralyzed by that leap that you have to figure out? Well, nervous system response, like all the responses, making it hard to even make a decision because you fear the consequences of any decision. You can't play out those scenarios. And of course, those scenarios, what get your mind stuck. It's sort of like playing out, what if this, what if that, what if this, what if that, and you have no validation on any of those questions. So your kind of mind spins into that. Some of us then like to avoid even dealing with it, because what we don't want to face is this, I just don't know. So same thing, if we find ourselves in that state, I love this phrase, regulate before reasoning, that before you even try to sort through all of that, get that nervous system calmed back down, breathe, walk, etc. Find where that ambiguity becomes a possibility rather than fear of all that uncertainty. Inventory what you do know, where there might be precedents, and find how you can experiment to keep moving, which is, by the way, right in here, designers, this is like a core skill of design. We can max out on it, but it is a core skill, and we do have a lot of methods that we can use here. The middle one is about prototyping. You've all mentioned prototyping, that we can build stuff that helps us learn. We can sketch to get our ideas out. We can build scenarios, and we can even do very advanced things, building in the wild. We can get things out into the world to give us a feedback loop. But part of it is embracing this shift from perfection to progress, that I don't know where this is going to head, so we just have to keep going. Here's the solution for now, and we can always change that again. That was really important, I think, in the pandemic. And then one of my new favorites is this kind of two-track thinking, that when you're in high ambiguity, speculative design can be wonderful. I'm envisioning a far future where none of the things I'm dealing with today are the problem. Like, I don't have to worry about today's issues. I can imagine a far future that's ideal for what I'd like to design. Except when you do that, you have this feeling like it's not enough because we do have today. So you can do both at the same time. This kind of what if, and then also like, how about right now we do this? And what's cool when you can get your mind in this two-track of design is you can start to imagine bridges between the two because you've got them identified. So there are lots of ways we can help ourselves as designers, and of course, young designers coming into the field, understand what might be happening to them and the kinds of methods available to help them navigate through it. Here is a beautiful summary slide of some of that. And to be clear, not comprehensive. I'm sure there's a ton more, but this is what I surfaced for you all today. All right, I want us to take some time to discuss this. And just going to give everybody a chance to finish photographing that. You can reference this when you're discussing. I thought it would be nice for us to spend about 20, 25 minutes just discussing some of this with a partner. I know this can be quite sensitive, admitting some of the vulnerabilities around where we might have been stuck in a design process. So you can, if it's hard for you to think about for yourself, you can think about in terms of somebody you've worked with, either a colleague or a student, where you've noticed any of these dynamics. So I would like for you to think about a time when stress or anxiety made it hard for you to create. And it can be for someone you were working with, or it can be for yourself. And just talk through, like, what were you working on? What was the scenario? Based on this framework, what might have been happening? What might have been happening inside of you? How did you get through it? And thinking about it now, how might you do it differently next time? Cool? All right, I'm going to ask you to pair up maybe with somebody you haven't yet talked to, and have a discussion. I'll bring us back in like 20 or 25 minutes to talk as a group. Okay? I'll leave this on the slide. Thank you. That was excellent. It's really satisfying, just to say. Sort of want to do it. I'm going to do it again, just so we can have the sound. I'm going to let it ring out. Bring us back together. Come on in, everyone. Thank you. All right. All right. Welcome back. Let's chat. How was that? What'd you talk about? What came up for you in that reflection? You don't have to tell the stories, but maybe share any reflections you had about some of those situations that are quite triggering and how you come back out of it.
I think we had a couple of discussions, and I think that we were thinking about strategies, how to solve those complex situations, and one was to slice the elephant into smaller parts. I guess that was what you said about transitions, right? That when you realize, okay, the problem is too big for us, the team, the agency, whatsoever, slice it down into pieces that you can handle.
Yes.
And also ask for help. If you realize, okay, this is too big for this team, this group, for me. And I'm not necessarily mean experts for help, but outside, I don't know, institutions that can help you in strange situations.
Excellent. That's a great strategy. Make it manageable. What will often come up, I think, for designers is when you make it manageable, you also take away some of the exciting feeling of how the big challenge felt very galvanizing. Like it's sort of like, I always say that like a thing that we got to do at IDEO is like when people are sitting at the bar with their friends after work and their friends are like complaining about work, and then they turn to the IDEO person and say, what are you working on? Then you could dazzle them with the kinds of questions you're working on because it felt so big and alive, like we felt we were doing great things. And sometimes when you get it to that point of manageability, you sort of lose some of that bigness. But of course, what we get into is the ability to advance. So I think that's a great strategy. And I think especially as you're working with young people around these questions where they're like, but I want to solve climate change. It's like understanding your agency relative to that question and scaling it to a place you can advance. But then thinking about those bridges of how that can ladder up once you do advance something. That's a great strategy.
And I also think actually that it was great from the American government to go to a creative agency, right, to support them with something like this, because this is not a given. I guess a lot of times they would just go in and say like, yeah, what the hell, we just, we do business as usual. So I mean, that's also, maybe this is also very motivating, that somebody gave you this opportunity to make life better for other people. I mean, maybe that helps, in uncertain situations as well.
There are a lot of people very driven to find new answers, and they are everywhere. They're in business, they're in government, et cetera. In that case, in particular, I think there were many organizations who had been advocating for a long time about doing things differently, and the research became a hook, which is sort of like, in this moment, like we have now new evidence that helps us reframe a dialogue. So it was actually that group of organizations that brought us in to help create a proposal that the state did receive. So yeah, it's very complex, isn't it? Great, thank you for those reflections. What else?
Annette and me had a talk together.
Yeah.
And the first thing is to find your home, maybe. And then this makes you sure.
Yeah.
And Annette gave me a present. She gave me my question. And I think to find your question can maybe just make your starting point clear.
Yeah.
So thanks for the question.
I love that. What a nice insight. That some of advancing work this big is about finding your own purpose in it, and that can carry you through many different projects, many different experiences when you know your question. So that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What else? What else came up? What about, did anybody talk about how this might affect some of the ways you talk about design to your students?
We didn't talk about it, but it makes me think of one of the courses that I have developed with a colleague. And instead of focusing on process or skills, we identified 4 competencies that designers and entrepreneurs need. And the 2 design competencies are imagination and courage. And it's actually 2 speakers that were in one of the symposia like these. They call in from Australia via Zoom every time to facilitate a session around courage and really beautifully make it clear to students that courage is not something that is an innate ability, but something that you can learn and train yourself to have. And then we send students out to do something that's courageous. And it's this real turning point for them because the questions we have them work on are like climate change. I mean, it's like big, huge 2044 challenges. And then we're like, okay, do something now. And it's the 3rd day, so they've spent quite a bit of time with the bigness of the challenge, but to then have to go into this, oh, I can actually do something. It's going to make me super uncomfortable, so I'm going to be courageous. That works really well. And I didn't think of it that way.
Yeah.
But it does this. Like, it actually works. And it's actually thanks to that input of folks who are not designers that makes that work really well.
That's cool. I love that. In a way, there's like the courage to keep going even though we know we're going to face some of these things. That it's not just the courage in problem solving, but the courage to kind of navigate through some of those physiological responses that we may have that make it harder to see. Yeah, nice. Anybody else want to share anything? Remember, when you share, other people get to learn. Any other insights that came up about you, your work, colleagues, students? There we go. Thank you.
Maybe it's too banal, I don't know. Yeah, ask for more time or give yourself more time. And stay with
Time is a
yourself.
tricky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
We had different subjects, but this was an important one in this
Yeah.
discussions.
Yeah. It's actually, time's a great factor to be considering. We sort of rush ourselves through some of these very big things.
Yeah, or especially, looking on your own ideas, your own designs within a distance of time, makes them more clearly.
Yeah. Nice. Anna?
I think we found it difficult to start with the assignment to start with, but we went in bringing things that might be relevant beyond design thinking. But one of the things we agreed with was sort of identifying, what do you call it, like foundational blocks from above. So we were thinking about how you can deal with anxiety and deal with stress and the challenge if you, on one hand, you pointed out how, well, it's not about you, it's really about what you can do for the particular client that you're trying to cater to. But partly it's also having that strength in knowing that someone chose you to do this. So partly like you are equipped because someone is tasking you with this. And that helps
Yeah.
to say, maybe I can't put my finger on it, why, but that's good. And that's a bit of a foundation that's nice. And I'm tasked with this, which means at some level, someone recognizes that I'm capable of this, which is useful.
Yeah. That connects to the confidence part of the conversation. Yeah. Nice. Anything else? I won't torture you by continuously asking that, but I do want to leave space for if there's anything else anyone wants to surface.
So it's not something we discussed in the group, it just comes to me. So we were working with a foundation who was working on a very wicked, big problem. And we were working with those who were supposed to measure the impact of that, which was pretty much impossible. So we sort of hit this roadblock where we thought everybody's just getting frustrated with this. And what they did is actually they called in a designer to make the process so much more visual and nice and, just something that they had fun doing rather than these Excel spreadsheets. And it was also dragging them down simply by sort of the way it was feeling.
Yeah, that's really thank you for surfacing that. I think that's something we don't discuss enough, the way it feels when we're going through something. And part of the skill of the designer is to keep it above the stress, right? To work, move ourselves through it, to be able to make, I love that, make it visual. I've done a lot of work with teachers, and every time we work with K-12 teachers, they were always like, oh my God, these materials are so beautiful. Like they felt so respected by just the way the information was pulled together, and it made a difference in the way they felt they could work through the questions. So yeah, thanks for surfacing that. That's a nice one. All right, I am going to bring us into just a wrap up on this. I have one more thing that I wanted to add to this. I am going to just point out, I think that there is something quite consistent across these 3 different trigger scenarios that I mentioned. I learned this term as I was talking with different experts, that this underlying dynamic, this man, Paul Slovic, calls pseudo-inefficacy. Pseudo-inefficacy, let me say that better. So what does that mean? You can probably tell, but it is that awful feeling that the problem is too big and you can't fix it because you're too small. And you can see that that feeling actually, this got surfaced in the conversation, that the problem just feels so big that we have struggled to see ourselves in it, and then we question ourselves. We are wired to feel our agency. We need to know that we can contribute and make a difference. And when we don't feel it, we kind of shut down. So that feeling of, who am I to solve this? Or I just can't process all this information, or I just don't know what's going to work. Those are whispers in our mind that are telling us that we can't be effective on the thing that we're trying to contribute to. So obviously that's a very heavy and big and complex dynamic, but I did want to offer some tips that aren't about taking on that whole dynamic, but 2 immediate remedies that help us step outside of that feeling. Those 2 remedies are curiosity and community. So why? The first one, curiosity. It turns out that judgment and curiosity cannot coexist in our minds. So if you are in a state of curiosity, you're not in a state of judgment. And if you're in a state of judgment, you can't be in curiosity. So curiosity is a skill we have that is the bridge out of judgment. And if we are feeling that we can't be effective, that we don't have agency, we're judging ourselves. So if judgment is the state that we're in, curiosity can help us out of it. Now, we need to be authentically curious, not like fake curious. But I think all of us and many of the designers that we work with can call that forth quite easily. So if you're working with someone who's in a state where they're feeling quite stuck, frame a question. Frame a question that you're authentically curious about. You say, right now, let's just use the bridge of curiosity to get out of that one state and into another. That curiosity will bridge us into our creativity. And the second one is community. The work is bigger than any of us can do. So the fact that we feel that we are ineffective if we can't solve climate change as an individual is a problem in our society. It's a problem in how we're training ourselves and how we're teaching ourselves and the expectations that we're setting to ourselves as designers or as creators. It can't be accomplished by you alone, but in community. If we know that everyone else is working with us, or we know there are people working with us, think like a choir. I love the metaphor. If you're in a choir and you're all singing, but you need to take a breath, you can, because the song is going to go on. And when you take that breath, you're now ready to sing through when someone else needs a breath. So how do we build community? How do we connect with other people that are doing this like work so that we know if we need a break because we're just flooded, our nervous system, like we're super stressed out, we don't know how we fit in, feeling ineffective, find your community. Find your community, hear what they're doing, see yourself in it, and then keep moving together. Those are the things I hope that you remember out of this session, these 2 points at a minimum. Also, let's normalize talking about nervous system responses and help our young people know how to navigate themselves through it. Some of the references that I looked to in this, I wanted to share with you. These are some great books or articles. I don't know if any of you have seen Martha Beck. She's Oprah's life coach. She's just published a book on anxiety, and that insight about judgment and curiosity can't coexist is really in the foundation of her book, where she talks about how we pull ourselves out of anxiety and that creativity is the path forward. Sarah Ray here is a professor who has dedicated now her research to climate anxiety and how we navigate it. She did this amazing interview on Hidden Brain that I would totally recommend, just about some of these methods of how we pull ourselves out of that anxiety to keep doing the work. And then, of course, there's many others up here, including our very own Anna, who I'm thankful for the introduction to, so I could mine all of her intelligence as I'm asking these questions about imagination today. All right, that's it. I'm going to give us a little bit of break, a little bit of time before the next segment, and I just want to say thank you all for this.